mobile edge computing has been an issue in the industry for years. It's just never really taken off because I think there's always been a business case concern about it. What are the applications that operators can monetize and make money out of? And it's because it's such a massive shake-up and requires a lot of investment. Telcos aren't going to go and do that unless they're certain they can actually make something from it. So it's a kind of catch-22 situation. And
hi, this is Jamie Davis, and this is the Telecoms.com podcast. This week, coming to you from Denver, where I am severely outnumbered by a lot of light reading people at the big 5G event. So just before we get into the actual nitty-gritty, we got the disclaimer. If you're watching this on YouTube or Facebook or on the website, don't forget you can download it through SoundCloud, iTunes and various other podcast platforms, and vice versa. So, kicking things off, Iain.
Jamie, how you doing?
Yeah, business as usual. Podcast another week, another podcast.
Yeah.
And
another venue for it.
Well, another venue, and making his podcast debut.
And debuting my American accent here, or my California accent, dudes. I am stoked to be on the Telecoms.com podcast.
Yes, yeah, first one. Yeah, I mean, apparently you've been nagging Pierre to be on it. Oh, sorry. Should probably introduce you properly. Mitch Wagner from Light Reading.
That's me, yes. I've been dropping subtle hints that I'd like to be on the podcast. These subtle hints have taken the form of things like, I'd like to be on the podcast sometime.
But they wouldn't fly you out to London to do it.
No. The Skype is a thing, though. You could see my amazingly cluttered office and the dog, and it would be great.
Perfect. So, what we're going to talk about this week, we're going to start off with, seeing as we're at the 5G event, we're going to be talking about 5G, and then also a topic which has sort of rolled over from Barcelona as well, sort of edge computing, just playing a much more significant role. Moving on to the second topic, it's more about the evolution of telcos, making them future-proof. And finally, it wouldn't quite be a Telecoms.com podcast without talking about Huawei. So, kicking things off, 5G. And Edge, what are your thoughts from the first couple of days, or the first day and a half of this conference?
So I think setting the big picture here, this may be basic for your listeners and viewers, but 5G requires a lot stronger edge computing simply because A, the signal travels a shorter distance, at least using current wavelengths, and B, a lot of the applications require faster latency, sub 5 millisecond or whatever. So that requires telcos to bring a lot of compute and storage and such like resources out to the edge, which they are not accustomed to doing, and this is a bit of a transition for them.
I think so. I mean that's one of the phrases that I picked up from the keynote this morning was, does 5G need the edge? Yes. Does the edge need 5G? No, it doesn't. So it's a bit of a conundrum. Because the point was, we're doing edge computing and sort of disaggregated computing on 4G networks, so we don't actually need 5G. Yeah. It makes it better.
Yeah, they could do the edge without 5G, but I talked to Vodafone about this a few weeks ago, and he said, well, you get a latency reduction with the standard between the so that's the bit that travels basically between the device and the cell site, but the sort of moving infrastructure closer to the edge of the network, taking it out of central data facilities and then moving it closer to the edge, that gives you the latency reduction on the kind of optical side, and that's the one that requires the kind of architectural shift that you could do without 5G. It's just you're going to get more benefits with 5G.
I mean, does that make it somewhat of a moot point? We're looking for 5G justification.
Mobile edge computing has been an issue in the industry for years. It's just never really taken off because I think there's always been a business case concern about it. What are the applications that operators can monetize and make money out of? And it's because it's such a massive shake-up and requires a lot of investment. Telcos aren't going to go and do that unless they're certain they can actually make something from it. So it's a kind of catch-22 situation. And there's a bit of momentum now with 5G, but I still think a lot of those concerns are there. We see Deutsche Telekom, Canada's Telus, who were here and were talking earlier on, trialing new technologies and talking about investments they can make. But there's not really any sign of anything happening in a big way. I mean, Verizon's made perhaps a bigger deal of it than other people. This week they were talking about having services out in the fourth quarter on
Yeah.
this platform they're developing in New York, but they're not really giving a lot of details about how extensive this is going to be or what sort of applications we are going to see.
Well, this is I think one of the big issues which I see evolving is that it makes when you look at Edge, it makes the telcos think about business in a very different way and this is sort of where it branches into a lot of your world as well, Mitch. You have to work with the cloud ecosystem a lot better than the way the telcos have been working with sort of parallel industries today. I mean, what does Edge mean to you? I mean, is it?
Well, it means bringing a lot of these, as I said, compute and storage out to the edge, things that have traditionally been the domain of IT.
Oh, here's a big question before you go too in depth there. How close to the customer do you actually need to be?
Very, very close. What is the bandwidth distance?
Yeah, what is the edge?
The bandwidth distance of 5G currently with millimeter wave was measured in hundreds of feet.
Yeah.
So that is very, very close. That's walking distance. But of course, you get into these metaphysical discussions of like, wow, man, what is the edge?
This is one of the key things because
Yeah,
the
yeah.
operators themselves don't really agree on. I mean, I did a story a few weeks ago on Edge and talked to some operators about how many of these smaller data facilities they think they'll need, and the numbers you get are just really very, very different. I mean, Vodafone UK is talking about having 8 Edge data centres in the UK and thinks that's going to be enough to do Edge-based applications and get latency down.
Yeah.
Whereas if you talk to people like Telefonica in Spain, they're talking about re-architecting really, really small kind of cabinets and things and potentially using some of those to do edge computing, which is a totally different scale. So
there was a really, really interesting presentation at the beginning of the conference, which seems like it was 28 days ago, but I think was actually 2. It was from AT&T and Bell Canada. And they were just talking about a lot of the physical constraints. So when you're talking about the edge, you're talking about, in this context of this discussion, the central office and also the cell tower.
Yes.
And you're dealing with trying to move IT technology out there when you're dealing with different rack sizes, you're dealing with different power supplies, you're dealing with HVAC units, air conditioning and heating requirements are different. These are very, very mundane considerations that can be showstoppers unless they are resolved.
That is fundamentally the bit of what we were talking about yesterday when you were actually talking about the split of investments for 5G and the radio, just purely because there's so many sites, there's so many other factors that you have to consider when you're looking at RAN, the cell towers. It's just so expensive. I mean, is that what is holding them back for the development of the edge? Because at the moment it doesn't seem although we've been talking about it for years, it still seems like a very futuristic conversation.
I mean, again, there's disagreement between the operators because some of them say the business case isn't there yet, and some of them say that actually there's big technical challenges that still remain. So Scott Petty, who's Vodafone UK CTO, was saying he doesn't think it's a business case issue. He thinks that that they need these cloud-native networks basically, and that's a massive change in the way that they've built networks in the past, actually taking sort of parts of the core network out and having those in sort of hosted on the edge is a real shake-up, and the systems are only just becoming ready now. So, he's sort of saying it will come, but it's going to be a 2 or 3 year tech transition. Whereas other people say, well, there's just not the business case for doing it. And you talk to Deutsche Telekom's had these trials going on in Germany with like low latency gaming, virtual reality gaming. It's like a sort of form of dodgeball. And they're doing it with a small company called Mobile Edge X, which is like the middleware platform. And they've got a few data centers that they've built where they're testing it. But you ask them, how does the business model work here? Are the users going to pay extra for doing this, or do you take a payment perhaps from the device company because it's a good thing for them? Or and they say, well, that's all up in the air at the moment. So those sorts of questions need to be kind of figured out as well.
I mean, that sort of moves us on quite well to the next topic, which is the evolution of the sort of the telco. And this is, it's something we were talking about before. I was talking to Mike Dano, another light reading colleague, earlier this morning, and there seems to be a lot of telcos that are saying, we need to evolve our business beyond speed being our primary business. And I've heard that, although it's nice to hear the frequency increase, the number of times it's being said makes me think, well, sometimes you just got to do it. I'm waiting to see some of these massive telcos go, okay, yes, we have evolved our business. I mean, we're very UK based. I mean, how is it from the American perspective? Are they moving beyond that idea of bigger, meaner, faster?
I don't think there's anything wrong with bigger, meaner, faster.
Okay.
This always drives me crazy when I hear the telcos talking about this stuff. It's just stay good at what you're good at. Don't.
I guess they're worried about just becoming being commoditized, aren't they?
Would that if you focus on what you're really good at, would that not see the re-emergence of the Title II? Moving them down into utility definition and more heavily regulated if they're focused purely on speed as opposed to value-added services as well, though.
Commodity businesses make money.
Yes.
You cut costs and you deliver highest quality at lowest cost, and you can do it. The cloud providers are the ones who are configured for providing this higher level of service, and even they have to go to somebody else to provide hands-on service to enterprise customers. So even they also have their specialization where they're not very good at service. And this, by the way, does suggest an opportunity to work together because the telcos have the relationships with the enterprises.
I think that. I mean, some of them seem to be happy to be commodity businesses.
Yeah.
If you get sort of private equity coming along and taking an interest in kind of building fibre networks or backing fibre networks in Europe, but a lot of the operators themselves kind of see themselves in a sexier way, don't they? They aspire to have a content play, and they kind of aspire to do something because it's very hard to compete as a commodity business, isn't it? I mean, you think about insurance companies and going to something like comparethemarket.com, and they're having to do these things like sell teddy bears along with an insurance packet just to compete and trying to attract you to that business. And the margins are really thin. I mean, you've got all these questions about, do you really need, this is perhaps more of an issue for Europe, but so many networks alongside each other. Why, if they're going to go to a utility model with extremely high bandwidth technologies, then why not just have one infrastructure and have a bunch of service providers operating on that in a kind of insurance-like way, where you go to a portal and you can choose which one you want.
Delivering bandwidth is not easy. So when I'm suggesting focusing on that, I'm not suggesting like these telcos are too dumb to do anything else. This is an extremely difficult problem that the telcos are specialized to deal with, and they might be well off to deal with that. On the other hand, I understand completely that the high profit margins and the glamour for investors is in these other things.
Well, I think that is part of...
It's a catch-22 that's been going on for like a decade and will probably continue going on for some time.
Well, I think that's part of the reason that they're so interested in moving into this value proposition, because what promises have been made to investors, and how long will a CEO be in charge if he takes that business down the commodity routes when the promise to investors has been we're converging, we're differentiating.
They're losing that battle as well, aren't they? I mean, they are becoming commodity businesses, and you've written about this a few times. Companies like Amazon Web Services now kind of entering the telco market and doing a lot of the stuff that they previously have done. And increasingly, all they have is the last mile. They just have that kind of connectivity play in the last mile.
Well, also the core. I see. Whenever I write these articles, I always use words like baby steps and might possibly, because they really are small. Facebook is offering bandwidth services, I think, in one sliver of Northern Virginia, if I recall correctly. This is hardly going to take over the whole world. And Google and Amazon are offering connectivity to their own clouds. That's it. These guys are very clear when I talk to them. They say, no, we are not competing with telcos, despite the fact that we're offering the same thing as telcos do in some cases. We see telcos as partners, but I often wonder when they're going to just kind of start pushing the telcos aside or requiring them.
I mean, the one thing that I think does offer a glimmer of hope for the telcos is if you look at, the business of connectivity, like you said, is hard. And Google found that out, what was it, last year? I mean, I've stopped writing about it with the Google Fiber business. But I think it's still running in some places, isn't it? But, their rollout was, I think it's pretty fair to describe it as a disaster. I mean, it wasn't, and I think that's the glimmer of hope. And where I do believe that there is some truth in the fact that they want to partner telcos, because they've seen how difficult and how expensive it is to actually do the business of connectivity. But again, they can just go buy them.
Or hire them, as they do for each other with the AI already. They can just hire telco engineers. So maybe the guy who's a CTO of a telco at 5G event this year hypothetically, goes and works for Google next year. So he's coming to speak for us again, but now he's got Google on his business card.
Yep.
Maybe. I even wish I hadn't said Google, because I'm just hypothetical here. I have no inside information on anything. Yeah.
People will be phoning you up afterwards, Mitch. What do you
Yeah,
know?
give me inside side. No, I just made that up as a hypothetical, guys. It was an example. I don't. Now the more I'm denying it, the more the guys are.
Tell us your source then, Mitch.
Yeah,
So who's your source?
This guy
Was it Eric?
It was Eric. Yes, Eric.
Okay, so we're on a bit of a schedule, so running low on time, and like I said before, it wouldn't quite be a podcast if we didn't talk about Huawei. So, bit of a tricky one to actually involve all of us, because I think it was only Iain that went to the breakfast briefing this morning.
Yeah.
So, well,
Yeah,
hand over to you.
yeah. I mean, so they had a briefing at 8 o'clock with their chief security officer in the US, Andy Purdy. He's been sort of in the public eye a lot recently, doing interviews. And I mean, the message is very much the same. They kind of pushed this. This came out a few weeks ago when they had a press event in Brussels as well, after they opened a new kind of cybersecurity centre. They're pushing a lot for this sort of introduction of more rigorous rules that apply to all vendors.
Keep the security
so
qualifications very
emphasising-
high for
I mean,
everyone.
I can't remember the name of the breakfast briefing, but it's something like Huawei, we are trustworthy. So they're obviously sort of trying to push that message that they're not a security risk.
They can't be. They can't be confused with being obscure here.
No. There's obviously a lot of these concerns going on still at the moment, where the US is trying to sort of put pressure on some European countries and operators not to use Huawei gear in their networks, because they kind of view it as a potential sort of conduit for Chinese spying. Huawei's response really is based. I mean, you've been involved in this, Jamie. Kind of doing a lot of work with journalists to try and get the message out there that they're trustworthy, but also trying to promote this idea of a kind of system of like a sort of security regime where you'd have testing centres that test not only their equipment but also equipment from Ericsson and Nokia.
Like the HSEC.
Yeah, and if they can get that sort of government approved, and there's sort of things happening in Germany now apparently to move towards that sort of approach. So if they can get that backed in Europe and have the US go, well, okay, that's something we're quite happy with, then the next step would be to try and maybe introduce that kind of system in the US and defend what existing business they have here.
Well, this is the thing. They don't have. They got minor pockets with, I think, some very, very regionalised and even connectivity.
I wouldn't even call them regionalised. Yeah, they're
just
really
even
small.
smaller than that.
Maybe the long-term objective. This wasn't asked, and thinking about it now, maybe I should have asked at the briefing. But maybe the long-term objective is this is a way potentially back into back into people's networks, and people like Sprint and T-Mobile and AT&T, if they can have the US administration go, well, we're quite happy with this kind of approach that you've suggested, let's get that up and running, and then there's an opportunity for you to compete. But obviously the chances of that happening, I think, are so slim, and they didn't seem to realise that they're running around doing all this. At the same time, there's stories in the news all the time about US resistance to some of the stuff that's going on in Europe. I mean, apparently, Mike Pompeo's...
No, he's in Iran at the moment.
He's in Iran at the moment.
He's in Iran at the moment.
But trying to put pressure on the UK, there's, if you read the sort of main news outlets, it seems like him and some other US officials aren't very happy about this approach that the UK's come up with, where they've said...
This is the leak that came out last week with Gavin Williamson.
And it seems accurate, because
fired.
Huawei brought this up today, so it seems like it is fairly accurate that you can't sort of use Huawei in parts of the network, but you can use it in other areas, and you need to have some kind of balance of suppliers. And
so from the US perspective, how much of this argument is coming across here? Like, are you aware of the UK or the European approach to Huawei? Because obviously it's a very, very much on the opposite end of the scale.
Well, I'm aware of it because I read this guy. I don't.
Or how aware are people of it? If that makes sense.
People within the industry, I think it's kind of a settled issue within the industry. I don't hear really any U.S. carriers expressing a desire to work with Huawei.
Interesting.
And I don't think that's because they have any particular hostility to Huawei. It's just because it's not on the radar.
Yeah.
They haven't been...
Well, they've got used to working with Ericsson, Nokia, Samsung, whoever it's going to be.
Yeah.
It's the same thing if you came along...
It's the status quo, isn't it?
It's the same
American...
They don't want to replace all their equipment that they've built out. It's the same reason that European operators don't want to swap out Huawei.
And they don't have Huawei salespeople coming to call Their internal people aren't asking to use Huawei, so that's not an issue. You said the people. You mean and like regular people? They don't even know about.
Mass market people in the industry.
Yeah, Americans don't even know who Huawei is.
Yeah.
Because their stuff isn't really significantly for sale here. You can't buy it. You can't really. I don't know anybody who has a Huawei phone. The people I know.
I got one.
Yeah. Well.
I mean, it's become in the UK where Jamie and I are based, it's become a front page news story.
Yeah, it's
like
hitting the BBC from the
it's on
front
the
page
BBC,
now.
it's on the Times, so their brand all of a sudden is very well known, just for the wrong reasons.
All right, so you expressed bafflement as to why Huawei is pushing this so hard, and I think we can point to two reasons. First of all, the U.S. is still a big market.
Yeah.
Anything
Yeah,
they can they can move that lever. A next administration maybe is more friendly to them. The other thing is the U.S. exerts an enormous amount of global influence.
Yeah.
I think one of the reasons it's such a big deal in the UK is that if what's the status of Brexit this afternoon?
It's been pushed back to October.
It's been pushed back
Okay,
a
all
couple of
right.
months,
So you guys are going to be possibly looking to get a lot closer to the US.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
financially and intelligence-wise as well.
yeah, and the powers that be may see Huawei as an easy bone to throw to Washington.
This is one of the levers that the US has used, hasn't it? It's kind of because the UK is a part of that sort of Five Eyes.
Five Eyes, the
sort of
global intelligence community.
Yeah.
Then they've sort of said, well, we're not going to share intelligence with you unless you do what we want you to, and that basically means not using.
Well, I think it's basically the UK that's the only one that's resisting from the Five Eyes now, isn't it? Because there's
Canada.
Australia. Yeah, I don't know. They're playing
So
Canada.
Australia's going along with it, or
Australia banned
Australia
Huawei
banned
from
Huawei.
all 5G.
Oh, okay, yeah.
5G.
yeah.
The UK's got this report coming out soon where they've basically said that you can have Huawei in some areas but not others.
Yeah.
New Zealand haven't officially made a stance, but their regulator turned down.
One of the operators
One of their
applied
operators,
to
yeah.
use Huawei equipment, and they basically got told by the regulator they couldn't do it. So
Yeah, my sense is that the U.S. success in this has been limited, and by and large, it's been a case of kind of holding the line on buying new Huawei equipment and on parts of the network.
yeah,
But this could flip rapidly, and if it does, it would be very bad for Huawei.
yeah.
So it makes sense for them to be pushing back on it.
I mean, I think the reason I'm slightly not baffled, maybe the wrong word, but Jamie and I have talked about this a lot. What's the real reason for the US, concern about Huawei? And is it seriously that there could be backdoors in the company's equipment? It doesn't seem very credible to me because so many. I mean, Huawei it makes this point, and it's a valid point that so much equipment comes from China, from companies that aren't Chinese. Nokia manufactures a lot in China. Ericsson manufactures a lot in China. So
There's putting the Chinese components
Chinese
in every
components,
supply chain.
yeah.
So the Chinese government, if it wanted to do that, to install backdoors, it would have a number of avenues to be able to do it. It wouldn't need to go through Huawei. And I think the real thing is that the US just doesn't like it's a power struggle, isn't it? It's
Power struggle,
of the
politically
Chinese
and economically.
US power struggle.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of broader context. And I'm sure Huawei must be aware of that as well. Because they're not stupid people, obviously. So pushing this security thing, is it really going to get them that far if that's the real reason for?
I mean, I think the UK is going to be one of the defining, like you said, for this Brexit, very, very much a Brexit reason. We are leaving the Union. We're going to need some stronger trade relationships further afield, and I think this could be a defining battlefield because the rest of Europe look like they're siding with Huawei. So shifting the UK could have somewhat of a knock-on effect to other allies in the Union. So, I mean, it's definitely an interesting one.
Yeah, I'm baffled by it too. You don't even need to have any hardware bugs to spy on people. You can do it just fine
Exactly.
if you're,
But the thing is, everyone spies on everyone.
Yeah, that's it.
The US, the UK, France, Germany, Australia, we're all bloody spying on each other. So, just to single out Chinese espionage, I think is a bit of a weak reasoning. Everyone can see through it, I think.
Yeah.
I don't see through it because I don't see what's at the bottom of it. Is it, and I'll say it here, is it racism? Is that it? Kind of this I don't know. I'm flailing here. I don't see a logic to it.
I mean, political difference is a massive one
It's
as
part
well.
of a trade war.
Ideological.
With China, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's where it fits in. China is it's it's the country that the US has decided it's probably going to have a war with in the next few years.
No, we're having a war with, I think it's Iran first and then Venezuela.
Then China.
Then China after that. You have to take a number. You have to take a number. I think you've hit on it. It's not racism per se, but it's this idea that China is the one country that's a trade rival to the US that is not also within the US sphere of influence.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
You know, when-
Ideologically,
yeah.
they're incredibly
And-
different.
and the company-
It's not even an ideology thing. It's like the US says don't do business with Iran, and everybody else says, okay, we won't do business with Iran, and then China says, we're going to do business with Iran.
But it ties in with all this stuff about the things we've just been talking about, 5G. If 5G does turn out to be as important as everybody is hoping, and it does support artificial intelligence and some of these other trendy applications, then it's going to be absolutely vital for economic growth and prosperity.
yeah.
And the companies that control that technology and that get a lead in it.
Well, I think the evidence of that
advantage.
in the 4G market is in California. You know, you've got
Companies
some
like
of Uber, you've got some of the biggest, most influential companies on the planet, which grew to that stage because of 4G and mobile connectivity.
And that's why they're worried about falling behind China. And I think the sort of anti-Huawei thing kind of fits into that narrative to some extent.
Yeah, I mean, is it? But here's another possibility that should also be of concern. If, as I believe you have written, there is evidence to suggest that Huawei is a generation ahead of Ericsson and Nokia and those guys on 5G equipment, then denying American service providers access to Huawei equipment hurts American competitiveness on the global market.
Yeah.
I think it's generally accepted that, especially on the radio side and in some parts of the sort of the transmission part of the network, Huawei is the market leader. So so it is a bit of cut the nose, spite the face. How much damage there is in the long run. It's very difficult to compare though, because Huawei isn't in the 4G networks, and 4G still fueled this massive economic growth in the US. So how do you compare it? But it is a tricky one, and it might come back and it might prove to be really negative.
Yeah.
So there we are. And on that bombshell,
Yeah, let's all be a downer now. We have low blood sugar, we're depressed.
it's 1 o'clock, it's lunchtime.
Yeah.
Mitch has got more videos to do. Ian's got more videos to do. I'm going to go. I'm going to go back to the hotel.
Okay. Nap time for Jamie.
Basically. Thanks very much, and we'll be back next week.